Hi everyone, welcome to the Aussies Conclave 4.0. We hope that you're all excited to all know about the topic that we're going to cover today, which is PR based on overseas studies qualifications while studying. Now, we get ready to meet our expert who will guide us through our journey today. It's Miss Rima Avasthi who will just guide us today throughout the sessions. Miss Rima Avasthi is an expert in the visas and also taking care about our PR in the different fields. Rima Avasthi is a registered migration agent at Aussies Group Adelaide, specializing in skill migration, employer-sponsored, partner and family visas, graduate visas, and visitor visas as well. She has several years of extensive experience in immigration, including visas, relocation management, work permits, human resources, and travel consulting. That's all, folks. Relax and enjoy the session. You're in good hands, and let's get started, Rima. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you, Ambika, for that introduction. And thank you to everybody who has joined us today for the Aussies Conclave session. I hope you find this PPT interesting and useful for your migration pathway in Australia. I'm just going to start with the session now. Like Ambika mentioned earlier, that we're going to discuss about PR pathways related to your overseas qualification while studying in Australia. It's not just qualification, but we'll also be considering your overseas work experience while you study in Australia. The topics that I'm going to cover in today's session are your Australian skill visas, which ones you could apply for, which professional occupations are there, which trade occupations can be assessed, your assessing authorities, and which subclasses you can apply for. And the first one would be skills assessment, because you cannot really proceed further with any of the skill visas without skills assessment. State nomination pathways have been covered in the other sessions, which I'm sure most of you all would have attended, or if not, you can go through the recording for those sessions. So steps for Australian skill visas. Now, most of you all would be aware through Google or whatever, for the skilled visas, you need to first check if your occupation list, if your occupation is in the Australian skilled occupation list. Now, Australia has got the different skilled occupation. You have different occupations which you need to select. You need to also calculate your points to see whether you've got enough points, which are made up of your English test, your age, your education, work experience, Australia study, regional study, different categories of points, and you need to have a minimum of 65. Your cutoff is 65 points. Then you need to also apply for skills assessment, which would be my focus on today, for the skills assessment through the Skills Assessing Authority. Then the next thing is to submit your expression of interest, whether you're going in for the federal government's independent skill visa or your registration of interest from the various states or territory governments. And then your very last step is to apply for the skill visa after you've been invited to apply for that through Skill Select. All right. Now, which occupations can be assessed? Like I mentioned before, there are different occupations that can be assessed. It is possible to procure your skills assessment for your overseas qualification and work experience while you're pursuing your studies in Australia. You could do this while you're on a student visa or on a temporary graduate visa. This will get you one step closer to applying for your skill visa in Australia and getting closer to your PR pathway. So which occupations can be assessed? These are IT professionals with overseas IT qualification and work experience, engineering professionals, which does not require you to have work experience for the assessment, the general professional occupations, which are more than 300. These are assessed by VetAssess, and they mainly assess professional occupations and trade occupations. So we'll cover both of them. Nurses, overseas nurse. There's a lot of demand for nurses in Australia at the moment. It's in the critical sector. So if you're an overseas nurse and you're a registered nurse overseas, then there is a possibility that you can get your assessment done. Using that work experience and your qualification from overseas, you can apply for your skill visa, which is a very good option for nurses. And then trade occupations, which are chef, motor mechanic, carpenter, hairdresser, and there are about 27 of them. Now, We can start with ACS Migration Skills Assessment. ACS is Australian Computer Society, and they assess all the occupations related to IT. So if you are an experienced IT or data science professional with recognized tertiary qualification and a substantial background of several years of experience, then you can get your overseas work experience and qualification assessed. The general skills pathway is the most common assessment option for individuals like you. What are the requirements for IT professionals? Your skills assessing authority is ACS. You need to have a minimum of bachelor's degree or higher and then your degree has to be with a major in IT and a minimum of 2 years work experience in the last 10 years, which has to be closely related to your nominated occupation. The work experience will increase depending on your ICT content and your qualifications relevance to your ANSCO occupation. Few occupations that can be assessed by ACS are ICT business analyst, systems analyst, multimedia specialist, web developer, software engineers and programmers, software testers, database administrator, and systems administrator. Not to mention, there are a lot of them, mostly IT-related occupations. So if you've had work experience in IT and you have a bachelor's degree or higher, I believe even a lower qualification can be assessed, but then your work experience will increase with a major in IT. So yeah, and then so that was for IT occupations. Now we can move to engineering professionals, which is done by Engineers Australia. Professional occupations that can be assessed. Engineering professionals, if you want to migrate to Australia as an engineer, you need to have your skills formally assessed. Requirements for engineering professionals, you have to check if your qualifications are accredited to choose the correct pathway. There are three relevant accords: the Washington Accord, Sydney Accord, and Dublin Accord. It depends on your qualification. If you've completed your qualification in Australia and it's listed in Engineers Australia, then you don't need to have your CDR done if it's an accredited qualification. But then that's, of course, not for major of you who are studying right now. If you're not studying engineering in Australia, if you've studied engineering from overseas, then you need to check if your qualification is in the relevant accords, which would be either the Washington, Sydney, or Dublin Accord, like I've written over there. And then if your qualification isn't accredited, if your university is not in those lists of universities, then you can still apply for assessment by drafting out your CDR. In this, your knowledge, skills, and competency are assessed, and competency demonstration report, I think that's what it's called. And then you need to draft your CDR. It has to be drafted by yourself in your own first-person language. So there's still a possibility you could still get your assessment done. If you've not studied in Australia, then you need to have your English test done, and Engineers Australia requires at least complete in English, which is 6 each in IELTS, or then 50 each in PT Academic. And then your English test results are valid for 3 years for EA assessment. Few occupations that are assessed by Engineers Australia are chemical engineer, civil engineer, structural engineer, transport engineer, electrical engineer, mostly all of these engineering occupations. If you've studied from overseas, we can certainly help you and assess your profile and check whether you're eligible. You just have to contact us later. So we'll move forward with VETassess. The content for VETassess is really large because they assess more than 360 professional occupations and approximately 27 trade occupations. But I'm just going to quickly speak a few things about VETassess, the primary eligibility criteria. So the primary requirement for eligibility for the professional occupations for VETassess is that you need to have, VETassess also, they assess both your qualification and your work experience. Your qualification will be compared to the Australian qualification framework, which is AQF. Both your work experience and qualification will be assessed. Your work experience will be assessed to determine its relevance to the occupation description. VETassess occupations are classified as in groups. example is Group A, which requires a minimum AQF bachelor's degree and in a field which is highly relevant to the nominated occupation. Applicants must have also 1 year highly relevant work experience for Group A occupations. This group of occupation does not substitute highly relevant field of study, and applicants must also have 1 year work experience post their qualification. Yeah, moving on. The eligibility is continued in the next page. The work experience and highly relevant field of study varies between occupations, and it's best to check with us for your eligibility. You do not require English test for VETASYS skills assessment, but you do require your English test for the overall Australian skilled visa process. And then some of the occupations which are assessed by VETASYS are chemist, food technologist, health promotion officer, nutritionist, HR advisor, fashion designer, web designer, photographer. There are a lot of them, mostly professional occupations, and like finance broker, cafe restaurant manager, hotel manager, facilities manager. The list is really exhaustive, but it's really interesting. So you can definitely contact us for if you've had any queries for VETASYS, because they've got 360 occupations and each occupation has got a different requirement. They've got groups from Group A to Group F, and each group has got its own work experience and qualification requirement, and then what should be a highly relevant field of study, and so on and so forth. So definitely get in touch with us for VETASYS. And if you are an overseas registered nurse, then you can definitely transition from that to your PR pathway and prepare your PR journey while you're on a student visa. Now, for overseas nurses, the basic requirement is that you may be eligible for Australian skilled visa. Overseas nurses, registered nurses, require to go through the assessment program to demonstrate that they have the necessary knowledge, skills, and competence at a level equivalent to that of an Australian nurse or midwife. So if you've studied from overseas and you've done a bachelor's degree of nursing, you would need to go through the conversion program or NCLEX or whatever it's called at the moment. You will need to go through that program and do an exam and then get your qualification at the level of an Australian bachelor's degree. It could take some time, but it's possible. You need to also demonstrate English language proficiency by doing IELTS academic and get 7 in each proficient English, or then 65 in each in PTE academic. And you need to also register for AFRA, which is the Registration Authority for Nurses. AFRA, if you've done your English test more than 2 years ago, then it won't be valid for AFRA because their requirement is that you do your English test in the last 2 years. And then you get your assessment done by ANMAC, and then you're all set. You can apply for your skilled visa depending on the federal government's 189 visa application if you put in your expression of interest for a 189, or then for your relevant state or territory, if you put an expression of interest for, say, South Australia or whichever state you're living in, then you need to do a registration of interest for that state. Okay, and now we can come to trade occupations. There are 27 trade occupations that VETASYS assesses. Your basic eligibility for trade occupations, there are 2 pathways. One is pathway 1. You don't need to have an Australian qualification or an occupational license for pathway 1. And then you've got pathway 2. First, we'll go through pathway 1 at the moment. For licensed trades, which are licensed occupations like a plumber and electrician, you need 6 years employment experience if you've got no formal training, or then 4 years employment experience with relevant formal training. And for non-licensed occupations, you need 5 years work experience, or then 3 years work experience with the relevant formal training. And then you need to also have your work experience in the nominated occupation in the last 12 months, for at least 12 months in the last 3 years, full-time. That has to be full-time. And for pathway 2, if you do have an Australian qualification or occupational license, Then you need to have worked in your paid employment in your occupation for at least 3 years full-time. And then you need evidence of full-time, 3 years full-time or subsequent part-time equivalent. And then you need evidence that you've worked for at least full-time in your occupation for 12 months in the last 3 years. And then for applicants in trade licenses who hold Australian qualification, the employment has to be done in Australia. And your basic eligibility, the employment eligibility I've explained before, the number of years work experience that you need. So basically it's between 3 years to 6 years for trade occupations, depending on your qualification and work experience. You do not need an English test for the trade skills for the assessment, but you do require English test for your overall Australian skill process. And then some of the trade occupations that can be assessed are baker, bricklayer, carpenter, chef, hairdresser. Okay, and then the assessing authority. We're just going to move to the assessing authorities to understand which are the relevant skills assessing authorities in Australia. Most of you would be already aware of this. Your assessing authorities are ACS, Engineers Australia, ANMAC, VETASYS, IML, and TRA. And there would be more than that. This is just a few of the popular ones. So ACS, Engineers Australia, ANMAC, VETASYS, IML, and TRA are some of the popular ones. And you can definitely contact us if you have any questions. Let's just see. And then once you've done all of this, you found out your occupation, you've got 65 points on the English in your points test, and then you've got your assessment done from the overseas qualification and work experience. Your next step is to apply for your Australian skill visas. You need to also submit an expression of interest. That's the basic step towards that. But then which are the Australian visas that you can apply for? These would be your 491 regional provisional visa, which is valid for 5 years. Then the 190, which is a permanent visa. 189 is the independent skilled visa. 482 employer sponsored visa. Some occupations do not require skills assessment for the 482. And then 186, which is the employer-sponsored visa. Right, so I've explained it for 491, 190, 189, 482, 494, and 186. These are your visas that you can apply for while you're in Australia.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining the meeting, and it was really great. Thanks. Thank you, Reema.
All right, thank you, Ambika. Thank you.